Namaskaram. I'm very excited today. എനിക്ക് ഒരു special guest ഉണ്ട്. Please welcome to the show Malayali American actress Moza. Nice to meet you.
Nice to
Swagadam.
meet you.
So I had encountered Moza through Instagram, and she has a very interesting story. So can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and where you are today and what you do and some of the things that you're involved with?
Yeah, absolutely. I was born in India, in Kerala, in Trivandrum, and I never lived there, but we spent every summer there. But I grew up in Abu Dhabi, and then I moved to the United States when I was 12, and moved around a bunch in America. Lived in Indiana, and then suburbs of Chicago, and then was in Chicago for a long time, and now I live in Los Angeles, and I'm an actor.
Like it's so interesting that, you know, on the surface you and I seem like completely different people, but there are so many tangents in both of our lives where we have like so many things in common. Like first of all, Nyangale Pole, right? So like we have a multicultural relationship. And then you were living in Abu Dhabi and I spent 5 years in Dubai, and that's like, you know, I know so many Malayalis that have like that Gulf Malu experience, you know. And then Chicago, that's like amazing because I have family in Chicago. So my grandparents came from Yugoslavia and settled in Chicago in the 70s. So after my dad got remarried to my stepmom, I used to go there every summer.
Nice.
You were in Abu Dhabi and then you came to the States when you were 12. How did you get into acting? How did that become a part of your career?
Well, it's funny. There was, I went to Abu Dhabi Indian School, which I think a lot of Malu kids and all Indian kids went to when they were in the Middle East, I think. So I was there. I left right after my 6th grade, and I remember like 3rd or 4th or 5th grade, like the seniors, I think, had put on like a play, and I remember just being so fascinated by it. And in my mind, I was like, well, I'm just gonna have to wait 6-7 more years until I'm a senior, and that's when I'll get to do that. So I think there was that spark always, like as soon as the first time I saw a play, and it was just like this 1 or 2, 3 person skit that the seniors had put together during like General Assembly. I loved it. And then when we moved to Indiana, it was this really tiny town, and as I was finishing up 7th grade there was a little sign for this community theater that all the high school and junior high kids come together to put together. I mean, it's run through the school, but it's all the actors and crew and everything is all high school and junior high kids. And that was my first like attempt or opportunity. I was like, it's a musical. Oh, I can do this now. I don't have to wait till I'm in like, 17 or 18. So I auditioned for it, and I ended up getting one of the leads because I think it was called South Pacific, and there were 2 roles for, brown people essentially, and it was a very small town, and the town was mostly white, so I think they were like, oh great, we have somebody who could maybe believably play I think Polynesian or something. So I think that's how I got the role. It wasn't due to experience. I didn't have any experience, but that was my first foray into acting. And since then I was like, oh, this is it. I love it. But I didn't so I ended up doing it all through junior high and high school. I was part of the Thespian Society and did all the plays and musicals. But when I got to college, I didn't even consider it as a career. I just thought, well, that was great. That was a good time. That was a hobby. Time to get real and serious. And I ended up going I thought I would maybe become a journalist and started down that path, but then changed my mind and decided to go into finance. And I worked in finance for a long time before I got back into acting. But yeah, it started like pretty soon after I got to America because there was an opportunity to do it. In the Middle East, it might be different now, but when I was growing up there wasn't really that many opportunities to do it. And through school, it seemed like I could maybe do it when I was in the 10th or 11th grade, but not in the 5th or 6th grade.
Right. So you've had the experience of being in the UAE and having like the Gulf Malayali experience, and then being in America and having that kind of third culture kid experience as well. So you have culture shock going from India to the UAE, and then you get culture shock again going from the UAE to America. Like my husband is also a Gulf kid. He grew up in Saudi, and so even though he strongly connects with Kerala, like he also strongly connects with a lot of like Arabic culture. So like he, you know, sings songs in Arabic. He misses the food and, you know, like getting the shawarma and these kinds of things.
Yes.
So how was that? Like, you know, you have two different cultures that you identify with, and then you go to America. How did you juggle that?
I never lived in India, but I would spend a lot of summers there. So I think probably similar to your husband, like it was, you know, definitely like that's my homeland, that's the language I speak, but I never went to school there, so I don't have that type of connection. UAE was like Abu Dhabi was what felt like home for the longest time. Like it was, you know, I mean, like right when you said like the shawarma, like nothing can beat that shawarma off of the street, you know, in UAE. Like it is the best flavor in your mouth. Like I like just thinking about it, talking about it right now, makes me like, oh, I want it so bad. But yeah, you know, like that was my childhood. I was there till I was 12, and so yeah, and it's weird because when you're there, it doesn't quite feel like you're home because it's not your language or anything, you know. So it was this definitely that weird pull. And then when I came to the U.S., I was just this foreign kid. So I think it was, and even when I was telling people, because I moved into a small town, it was like, you know, I think there was a lot of confusion. It was like, wait, so are you Indian or are you Arab? I'm like, well, I'm not Arab, but that's where I grew up. But I'm Indian because that's the language I speak. My parents are Indian. So I think I carried a lot of that like kind of confusion with me. And I think because I came to the U.S. when I was 12, there was just a lot of like, I think one, I was very excited to move to America. So I think a lot of the nervousness and confusion melted away with the excitement. And then I was also very, very lucky to find a wonderful group of kids to like immediately connect with, and you know, and I ended up reconnecting with one of them in Los Angeles like 15 years later or whatever. So I think my experience could have been a lot harder and more isolating if it hadn't been for this wonderful group of kids that I ended up meeting when I was in Terre Haute, Indiana. And I think as I get older, there is also a bit of like sense of like, well, what is home? You know, it's not UAE anymore because I left it when I was 12. And then it's never been Kerala because I've never lived there. There's no house that I identify with, but my parents are back there now. So I go there twice a year. Most of my family is there, but that's not home. And the U.S. is honestly where I've spent, you know, from 12 on. So, but there is that feeling of like childhood nostalgia isn't in the U.S. So I think there's a lot of times where a part of me still feels like I'm searching for a home, and it's just kind of, and then, you know, and then it kind of, like you said, kind of changes with like, you know, if I'm with all my friends that I've known for a long time, then that feels like home because it's like, wow, you've known me the longest, you know, so that's more home than anything else, you know, like, but then a part of me feels like, oh, where's home? What feels like home?
Yeah, I do think especially there's so many people that are in a similar situation as you are, had this kind of flux growing up. And I think, you know, in our modern globalized world, I think the term home is a lot more fluid than what it meant maybe in our parents' generation, you know. So I think we have to kind of work with that. Now, being from different places, what's interesting is that there's always a lot of stereotypes around different people. So, like, if you're from Kerala, people always talk about these stereotypes about the Gulf Malu kids. And then the Gulf Malu kids have stereotypes about the American Malayalis, you know.
I don't know, actually. I don't know if I know what the stereotypes are. Actually, I'm curious, what are the stereotypes? What stereotypes have you heard?
Well, for me, the Gulf kids, it's just like, oh, you know, some people think that since the parents are working in the Gulf, then they have so much money and they're super privileged and they get anything they want. And then another stereotype is that, like, they don't care about the language, or they don't care about the culture, or they don't appreciate, you know, what it is. And so, like, there's this inferiority-superiority complex. And it's really interesting because it tends to contradict itself, because you have parents who raise their kids in English medium schools and then get mad when they don't speak Malayalam. And then you have people who are trying to learn Malayalam and then they mock them because it's bad Malayalam. So then they stop speaking Malayalam and it's like, I don't know. You know, it's like, oh shit. So, you know, so I really feel for these like third culture kids, because it's like, well, shit, I'm not good enough for this place, and I'm not good enough for this
You
place
can't win
either.
either way.
So I don't know if you've ever
Yes.
yeah, so I don't know if you've ever experienced that feeling of just being like, I'm not Narden enough, and I'm not,
Right.
Gulf enough. I'm not
Yeah.
American
Oh,
enough.
now that you say that,
Yeah.
I think that stereotype definitely goes the stereotype of like thinking that everybody from a foreign land is super well off and has access to money. I think that definitely covers both Gulf and USA kids. I think the immediate assumption is if you're overseas, you're just swimming in piles of money like, Duck McScrooge or something, and it's just money growing out of trees. So I think that's definitely the case. But yeah, I think for the most part, I didn't get too mocked for my Malayalam. Probably because I was like coming often enough. So I was speaking it pretty, and also like I was spending every summer there. So I was like getting a good dose of Malayalam, but people could always tell that if I wasn't from there, they would hear the accent a little bit. I think the funniest thing
Right.
was, I remember I was, visiting Kerala, and my mom and my aunt were in the back seat, and my uncle was driving, and I was in the front seat. And my mom was like, "Hey, can you go buy me, a Manorama? Like what? I forget whatever the magazine was.
Manorama.
And
Manorama.
so,
yeah.
and I was like, so she gave me cash. So I went to the sales guy, and I gave him cash, and I told him in Malayalam, I want one manore, and then oru manorama tha. And he was like, go ahead and take it, edutho. And I was like, ഏതാണ് manorama? And he was like, what? And I was like, I can't read it. And he's like, why are you buying a magazine that you can't read? Was the expression on his face.
Oh.
And I was like, my mom wants it. So I tell, so and when I take the issue back to my mom, I was like, he was asking a lot of questions, and I was like, well, he was confused that I couldn't tell which magazine it was if I couldn't read it. So my mom and my aunt are just cracking up in the backseat of the car, and I was like, well, I never learned how to read it. It's like, don't make fun of me. So that was always, but like my cousins never really. People could always tell that I was not from there, but. Yeah, there are times when people are kind of confused. I'm like, wait, you don't know how to read and write it? And I'm like, but you can speak it? And I'm like, yeah, I think that's common because I just heard it, just learned it through hearing.
And it's even common in Kerala now that people speak Malayalam and they can read some of it, but they don't read novels or any kind of literature in Malayalam. They read it in English. And it's just because in English medium schools, I've had several people tell me their libraries are pretty much only English. And, you learn the basic letters and you can read signboards and things like this, but it's not necessarily, the new generation isn't exposed as much or encouraged as much to read in Malayalam. So another thing I was thinking about is how like in the UAE generally you have these huge Malu populations. Malayalis, there are huge collections of Malayalis, they're just there, and so it's kind of like little Kerala. Like when I was in Dubai, you go to Karama, you go to these like places, it's just full of Malayalis. But in America it kind of gets dissolved, and so from my own observations, I found that if Malayalis tend to not find their own community, there tends to be a pan-Indian type of group. And then there are bits of Malayali culture that get lost, I think. So instead of watching Malayalam films or doing things with Malayalam songs or music or pop culture, they kind of get absorbed into this pan-Indian identity. Have you seen that in your circles growing up?
Absolutely. I think, because I'm always excited if I can find a Malayali anywhere. I'm like, you're Malu? Like, let's talk in Malayalam, and it's, and I think it also comes from the outside. I think from the outside looking in, everybody's just Indian and lumped in, and they're like, wait, you don't speak Hindi? Explain to me Bhalburi. And I'm like, that's not where I'm from, And it's like, so
Right.
There's the assumption that an Indian knows everything Indian, but what's actually transferred from India to America is a very specific subsect of Indian food and Indian culture and everything. So absolutely. And I think that's also projected in from how Americans view Indians. But absolutely, like when we first moved to Terre Haute, Indiana, I think most of the Indians there were from Andhra Pradesh. So we didn't really find a lot of Malayalis. And then it wasn't until we moved to Hoffman Estates and my parents found like a sect of, like a group of Malayali families to hang out with. But even then, none of their kids were my age. Like all my friends in high school, I actually ended up finding a wonderful group of like Indian friends, but they were from, you know, Gujarat or like different parts of India. So again, I don't think I had I didn't know anybody in my high school that was from Kerala. From the outside in, there's like always an expectation, like, well, you're Indian, so can you explain this to me? And I'm like, I actually don't know anything about it because I'm from Kerala. This is not the food I eat, or this is not the religion I practice. And so I think there's definitely a lumping up, like, you're Indian, but India is so vast and so diverse with different languages and different like foods and cultures and everything. Yeah.
One thing I try to tell people is, like, if you say, like, oh, he's Indian, it's like saying, oh, he's European, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like there's so many different cultures and varieties within Europe. And if you say he's European, that doesn't really answer your question. Okay, well, is he French? Is he Italian? Is he German? Same thing with India, you know. Is he Malayali? Is he Gujarati? You know, and I think that we Westerners really should try to update their perceptions of what the Indian continent means and what's within it. And it can be difficult because, as you said, you know, so much of the media that we've consumed, it kind of makes it into a monolith, and it makes it difficult for people within that community to kind of break out of people's expectations for them. So, like, my stepmom, she's really well-meaning, you know, she's never had an issue with me marrying Arjun, but she'll send me things sometimes and be like, can Arjun read this? And I'm like, it's just Hindi.
There's nothing similar between the two. Yeah.
Because I think it's interesting, because going back to earlier, we were talking about stereotypes. A lot of these stereotypes are like, because you see the NRI kid in an Indian movie, and the NRI kid is usually the butt of a joke.
Okay.
Like, oh, he doesn't understand what's going on. Oh, or he's coming in with like the super fresh, like trendy clothes, or these kinds of things. And it's just interesting because a lot of times we talk about portrayals of different Indian characters in Hollywood films. But on the other side of that coin, as a foreigner to Indian culture, it's always fascinating seeing how foreigners are portrayed in Indian culture.
Yeah, there would be like
I remember,
one white person in like a Bollywood film, and I remember growing up, like there'd be like one baddie or something, and it'll just be like this white blonde dude, and it was like, where did he come from? And it's like there's literally one in this entire landscape, and absolutely, it's like it's exoticized, but also like doesn't make sense. Like it's just like this. It's like they're not even in the same world sometimes.
Well, it's just funny because like the villain in a lot of older Malayalam movies is either a North Indian or a white person. And I'm just like, so. And I remember like it's not such an old movie. It's an important movie. Ustad
Oh
Hotel,
yes, yeah,
Salman,
I saw that
you know,
one.
Yeah, so like his white girlfriend, you know, like cheats on him like the first second that she gets, and I'm just looking over at Arjun and I'm like, what is this? And he's like, I never thought about it, and now I have a white girlfriend, and now it's like, you know, and it's like, oh, see, like, you know, these small stereotypes,
They
but they
absolutely
exist. Like when Arjun and I were getting married, you know, people are like, oh, you know, these Western women.
Oh sure, absolutely. I mean, I think my parents were convinced that he would divorce me because every white person divorces their spouse, you know. I remember us going into, I think it was in Coimbatore, and it was like right after I think it was our first trip or second trip to India after we got married, and there was just like a lot of staring that was happening, and I was like, you know, and it's India, you get stared a lot. But this was like more than usual, and my mom was like, it's probably because you're with a white guy and they think you're that type of girl if you're with a white guy. And it's just like, it's unfortunate, but it's always like underhanded or whatever. It's like, you know, but yeah, that's the unfortunate.
That brings up an interesting point, you know. So last year I did this project called Nyangale Bole, where I was collecting stories from different couples that were in multicultural relationships, not just with Westerners, but even pan-India, because it's equally as difficult to have a partner from another. And I noticed that it was almost always more of the Malayali man with a non-Malayali woman. It seems like culturally it's much more accepted or easier to have the family agree for their son to marry a non-Malayali wife. I mean, there's still issues, it's still difficult. I don't see so much of the Malayali woman marrying outside, and I feel like maybe culturally it's just more difficult. Like, oh, we can't give up our daughter to this, kind of a thing.
I'm curious, were they living in India or in the Gulf, or were they living abroad?
You see, that's the thing. The ones that were the Malayali woman with a non-Malayali man were mostly the ones that were living abroad, like in the US or even in the Middle East. So like I said, it is a different cultural shift, I think. So it is fascinating. It's a very complex, fascinating topic.
I think, it probably is that thing, like being more protective of daughters and type of thing, can't trust them with a white guy, but is the man maybe, it's archaic, but yes.
So coming back to your work, so you started off being basically the token brown character in a middle school play. Did you find as you got into professional acting, at the beginning at least, that you felt pressured to be boxed into certain roles? Did you feel you weren't able to explore a lot, or did you feel that you had a bit more agency over the type of roles that you wanted to portray?
Right. I think, again, I lucked out with timing. Like, as I was getting into Hollywood, I wasn't like one of the very first Indian actresses to go in there, where I think I would have been a lot more likely to box in. It was at the time where people kind of wanted a little bit more diversity. It's been getting better, even like the last few years it's gotten better. But a lot of the roles that I got weren't specifically written for Indian characters. It was written for, a lot of times it was like diversity encouraged. Like they just wanted some sort of diversity. So a lot of the times I got to portray roles that weren't specific to like, this person had to be Indian and it was about their Indianness. It was like this person, so I was very, I think, and that really was based on like the timing of kind of when I got into the industry. Because I started doing TV I've been doing TV in like for about 9 years. And so I think if it was, 20 years ago, I think it would have been a lot of, like, they just wouldn't have been that many roles for me.
All right, so I have a little game for us to play. I like to do this with my guests where I invite them to have a little bit of fun at the end of our chat. So, would you like to play a game?
Yes. I'm so excited to hear this.
So you were in a show, Naomi, which is following the story of a superheroine. So today I'd like to test your superhero knowledge.
My knowledge of superheroes is decent, yes.
So let's translate these Malayalam names into their English counterparts, starting with Vaval Manushan.
Vaval Manushan. Vaval endana. Like Aquaman?
Oh no, it's an animal. You find it in dark places.
Oh, Batman?
Yeah.
I'm gonna be terrible at this. That's what we're gonna find out.
This one you should get. Okay. Pacha Velakku.
Oh, Green Lantern.
Yes. So the next one is Nakshatrathile P.
The fire.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
Nakshatram. That's not night, right? It's not.
It happens in the night. You see it in the night.
Oh. Something fire. A superhero that ends in fire. You see it in the night. Oh, not moon. No.
Not moon, but close
Star?
to it.
Star? Starfire? Oh, Starfire.
Yes!
Okay. See, I'm good at conversational Malayalam, but I think if I look at the sky, I'll be like, oh, and then the Bhangyula stars.
Bhangyula stars. Alright. Okay, we'll do one more. One more. So, Vismaya Stri.
Wonder Woman?
Yes!
Okay. Oh, gosh. Oh. I should have maybe looked at what bat was in Malayalam.
It's okay. Don't worry about it. So, as we're wrapping up, where can people find you so they can keep up with what you're doing and what you're up to?
Yeah, so Instagram is where I'm heaviest in. I have a Twitter account that I don't really post too often in, so Instagram is definitely, that's just my name, Mouzam Makkar.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you for this. I like I said in my initial email, I love what you're doing. I love your work, and I feel like I'm learning a lot. Even though I'm fluent, I've learned quite a bit. I was like, oh, that's what that difference is. I didn't know why. So I appreciate what you're doing and all the content you're putting out there. I've always loved Malayalam, and I've always loved being able to speak it, and it's very exciting for me for somebody to learn the language and kind of bring that excitement again to even more people. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. All right, so until next time, Pinay Kanam. Thank you.
Thank you. Pinay Kanam.